Welcome to Software Without Borders, where we delve into the limitless potential of software and how it's transforming businesses globally. I'm your co-host, Jared Striner. With me today is my co-host, the CEO of Accelerance, Andy Hilliard. Today, we're diving deep into the transformative power of software and shaping early-stage companies. Our guest, Glenn Bachmann, brings over 30 years of experience in software development and leadership. And he's here to share his insights on the build, measure, lean methodology that can help startups achieve liftoff. As the Chief Technology Officer at Field Squared and a mentor at the Charleston Harbor Entrepreneur Center, Glenn has guided countless founders towards their goals. If you want to scale your startup or enhance your product development strategy, you won't miss this conversation. Glenn, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jared. My pleasure. It's great to be here.
We know you've had a long career, so can you take us back to the beginning and what inspired you to enter the software industry and how that journey has shaped your perspective today?
Sure. Happy to. It is a long story. It gets longer every day. So my really earliest experiences were some of the ones that really set my journey. I was part of a small team. This is way back. This is pre-internet, pre-everything, right? We were just putting together personal computers that could talk to one another. And one of my earliest jobs, I happened to be part of a team that built a real-time bond trading portfolio management system where traders on a trading floor could instantly bring up their positions, make trades, things like that. And prior to that, they would wait for mainframe processes to run reports, and it was always a day late and all that. So that was really my first taste of, wow, a small team can build something that actually transforms the way that people work. And I could actually just walk over to the trading floor and ask them, does this look right? How do you want this to work? And they would tell me, and we would do it, and we would deliver it, and they would be overjoyed. Like nothing like that had ever happened for them before. So that was really my first taste of how exciting that could be for me and the impact on users and ultimately customers. The next real juncture for me, and I was bringing one of my favorite props here. If you recognize this at all, it's quite dinosaur-like at this point, but this was the very first Palm Pilot. Before I knew it, this was late 90s. I had started my own software company. We were doing projects, and one of my developers happened to bring this funny-looking device into the office and said, "Hey, this is pretty cool." And we started looking at it. We discovered that there was a way to actually write software for it. It wasn't just something you carried, but it was really limited. You couldn't make a phone call. You couldn't get it on the internet. You couldn't send an email, right? It was all personal information tracking, but you could add, and we didn't even call them apps at that point. It was too early. But we were pretty sold from day one that, if this thing becomes really widespread, it's going to transform the way people live their lives and work. Having a powerful computer in your pocket everywhere you go just opened up a tremendous amount of possibilities. So we basically turned the company around and decided to bet the farm on, we are the experts at mobile application development. Before you knew it, we were getting phone calls from companies I had no business getting phone calls from. HP, Kodak, they all had been told by Palm, the company, that we were the guys to talk to in terms of to develop software. We did the first Weather Channel applications, whole bunch of other stuff. So for a period of time, we were kind of the go-to guys for mobile. That changed later on when Apple came along and made it possible for basically almost anybody to develop apps. But we still kept the ball rolling. Kind of along the way, and this was super early days for Agile. Agile existed as a thing, but it really wasn't as widespread, certainly as it is today. But going through that experience and building mobile applications for customers, we really learned very quickly that you had to get a product out and in customers' hands in very short order. Like the cycle was not years, it was not even months, it was weeks to 3 months. If you missed that target, new devices come across, people change their minds, market conditions change. So you really had to be really adopt a rapid methodology, which was not every developer was really, developers were very used to very long-lived projects that took a very long time to get into customers' hands. And we pretty much figured out early on that if you're building something and you don't get it in customers' hands, it has no value, right? You think it's great, right? Has all these features. Nobody's using it. Nobody's changing their lives because of it. So that was early on, plus the power of personal user engagement, right? People have this thing in their hands. The world comes to them through that device. Previous to that, you would always have to go and work on the terms of whatever piece of software you were using, whether you were on the early days of the internet or using someone else's software. You had to work the way that they wanted you to work. This was very different, right? The expectation was that we would meet the customer on their turf, right? And provide them with features. So those two things really guided many, many years of how I approach projects, products, the business of creating software, all that. So basically today I take all that and it really informs how I work with my clients. And, whether it's in the capacity of like a CTO or advisor or coach or whatever, those are principles that have stayed with me over the years. So
Glenn, you and I have worked together for many years, and as you mentioned, your interest, your energy, your excitement is around helping small companies build software products. Can you describe, and I know every situation is different and every client is different, but can you describe a typical scenario where you come into a company and they have certain assumptions and maybe misconceptions on how to build a product, and how do you level set with them? How do you get aligned with them and start building the framework for professional product development, and how do you get them sort of on the same page with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and like you said, every situation is different, but the general themes I run into is at the extreme smaller ends. We have a founder or founders that are building a business, and they really are building. They don't have a team yet. They don't have a product plan. All that, and that is basically, green fields for me, right? I can come in and bring in good process, bring in a great team.
They see a need in the marketplace, and maybe they're business people who can capitalize, fill that need with a service or a product, that could be a good, business.
They have a vision, right? And they need a partner, which is really how I see myself as a partner to them. The tech founder, the product founder that they didn't have, right? Oftentimes the CEO's has a business background. Occasionally it changes, but that's that scenario. Your other end of the spectrum is you have a more mature company, not large by any sense. I tend to avoid those, but something in the 10 to 20 employee kind of range. They've been around for a while. They have a team. They don't really have very good best practices. There are definitely holes in their process. Maybe they're lacking process. Maybe they're not even sure. Yeah, is my team any good? Right? How do I know? If I'm a small company and I'm a business type person and I have these developers, how do I even know that they're working 8 hours a day? How do I know if they have the skills that they say they do? They're working at some pace. Is it slow? I don't know. We seem to have a lot of bugs in our software. Our customers are annoyed at us. Those are the kinds of sticky situations I get into, and neither of those two scenarios is better or worse than the other. They just have kind of different problems. And in some ways, the one that has a bit more infrastructure, they kind of have a feeling that there's something wrong, right? So they kind of know, and we can work together and gradually improve things, whether we have to swap out or augment the team, instill some processes. It's kind of a gradual transformation, whereas the other one is much more of a clean slate.
What about some of the misconceptions and some of the largest hurdles you typically have to overcome when you start to engage? Is it around cost, time, complexity, scope, choices having to be made? Like I'm running through a whole list, but maybe you can prioritize them and sort of talk about some of these so, some of these level setting areas that you have to address?
Yeah, certainly how rapid things can change, especially if you've dug yourself a bit of a hole and have some problems. It took you a long time to get into that hole. It's going to take a little bit to get out of it. Things don't transform in a day. But what I try to do is make sure that we are incrementally showing improvements all across the board by attacking problem by problem or a set of problems at a time. Right? You can't change everything at once, but you can certainly start to affect change, whether it's bringing on some great new team members, filling some roles that we're missing, adopting some best practices, processes, things like that. So the perception that things are going to be better tomorrow when you're in a hole and your customers hate you and all that. I'm exaggerating, but those things are not going to turn around in a day. So patience, understanding, but also understanding that the clock is ticking and we do need to deliver some of those improvements. I think is one of the bigger misconceptions.
So you come into this embryonic organization. How do you create and maintain alignment with the stakeholders so that people aren't losing confidence or feel like they're not level set or equally connected with the process and are fully engaged and fully committed? How do you maintain that? How do you set it and maintain it?
And that's the role that I generally inhabit. It can be along the spectrum, but generally I will have company leadership who at the far end, they know that there are problems. They want those problems to be solved, but they're not deep into. They don't want to hear about agile processes or user stories or Jira or the things that the engineering team. So I provide that kind of two-way communication. I talk very often with the leadership of these companies. And like I said, I come in as basically a partner at that level. That's how I see myself. And do a lot of listening and then translate the vision, the direction, the priorities to the engineering team. Kind of facilitate it that way. And then coming the other way, super important to be able to show those early wins and often wins from the development team in the form of demos that I really enforce that leadership has to attend, right? You have a job here to monitor the growth and the progression of this software and to provide your feedback and give us that feedback and course corrections if necessary.
I find it interesting that you pulled up a Palm Pilot. I remember the first day my dad actually brought one home and he's like, I bought this. And I'm like, do you even know how to use it? And he goes, absolutely not. So I had to sit down and kind of walk him through it, which was like always the fun thing whenever he bought new technology. It's I bought this thing. I don't know how it's going to work. You're going to have to show me. And that was just like always an ongoing thing between the two of us. And it's always hey, do you remember how to do this in Microsoft Word? I'm like, yeah, I memorized the entire menu, Dad. which it always goes into the same thing. When you have to come into a company, it's like they might not know, right? They don't have the expertise in doing what you do, and you're there to guide them. So, that being said, you've had a wealth of expertise guiding teams and companies. So what's the most common misconception with an early stage company when it comes to product development?
Probably the scale of what you need to deliver is usually less than what you think, right? And we'll get into this as we talk about build, measure, learn. But getting something in the face of customers as early as possible, even before it's finished, even before in some ways it even works. Super, super important. But the initial misconception is how long is it going to take to build all of this stuff, right? The other, there's a lot. Hiring good developers is all about skills. Well, that's part of it. I kind of assume that if you're even in the conversation, you have to have the skills that you have on your resume. What I'm really looking for is, especially at an early stage company, you have to pull your own weight. You have to be able to run your own show, as I put it. You have to be a self-starter. You have to know when to ask the right questions. You have to know who to go to pull the requirements out that you need, those things. If you're hiring doers based upon the skills that they have, you're going to spend innumerable number of hours daily managing that person and making sure that they're doing things the way that you need to be done. That's a really big difference and a misconception I see in terms of building teams.
So can we dig into that a little bit more, Glenn, as far as, building highly effective teams? Well, what is your approach to doing that? So they've hired you as a chief technology officer and a product management guru, let's say, and you've helped them sort of envision the product and the various iterations of that product, and now you have to build a team. So how do you build a team and at the same time, again, still maintain alignment with stakeholders and make sure that they're on board, and how do you involve them? Because in the end, they're paying all the bills and they want the ROI. So how do you prove to them that you are building a high performing team?
Yeah. So it starts out with identifying the roles that are needed, what you're looking to build, what are the platforms. Oftentimes at an early stage company, you really only have the budget to be one, maybe two deep on each platform. So let's say you've got a web app, a mobile app, and you've got a back end with database and all that stuff. So, those are those three roles that I see so often. And again, budget constraints, no matter where in the world you're bringing them in from, oftentimes will limit you to being one deep. So going back to what I said before, that reemphasizes superstar is probably too strong of a word. Rock star, those things are bandied about, but you do need a pretty hefty person in order to be that one deep person at each of those roles. Someone who really has that track record and can kind of run their own show.
So as you mentioned earlier, the lean is really the framework that you like to use with startups. So the build, measure, lean framework is central. How have you seen it transform the approach companies have when you work with them?
It's when you can get people to onboard with the concept, and that can be a struggle sometimes, depending on what you have to undo. It can be tremendous, right? It's a way of thinking about how do I know if what I'm building is going to be of value and actually solve a real problem for a customer. You may think right? Maybe you're even from that industry that you're writing software for, right? So maybe you know a lot about it. Maybe you've experienced those pain points yourself. Still, you're making a lot of assumptions about what you're building and that people are going to be willing to pay for it. And does it really solve that problem? You have to talk to customers early and often. And if you do that and you do it cheaply, efficiently, and you get the feedback, you have lowered your risk tremendously, and you've increased your chances of success many, many times over. There's some fun historical stories. One of them is from the Lean Startup book itself. One of my favorites is Jeff Hawkins with Palm Pilot. Basically, if you've heard the story, when Jeff had conceived of there being a portable computer that you could carry around with you, he didn't go off and build it and spend millions of dollars, on the hardware or anything like that. He carved a block of wood that was about this size. Pretty quickly learned that it had to be small enough to fit in your shirt pocket and carry around with you. He carved a stylus out of I think it was a piece of bamboo or something like that, and pasted a screen made of paper on it. Carried it around with him for weeks to every meeting, pretended to take notes on it, pulled it out, used it in every situation he would expect a customer to use it, let other people use it. and learned a ton about how people want to use it and when, based upon a block of wood, right? So we think of one of the misconceptions I run into with companies that I've kind of stopped using the word prototype because it conjures this image of something you do once at the beginning of designing your product, and it's fake, and you build it, people sign off on it, and then you go off and design and build your product, and you're done. Lean is more of it's the lifetime of the business. It's something you ought to have a muscle memory for, that anytime you're thinking of doing something new, whether it's a new feature, maybe it's a pricing plan, maybe it's product tiers, maybe it's how you do customer support. These are all things that, if you're doing it right, you should be talking to your customers, testing out your assumptions about how they'll react to them, and taking that feedback and improving your likelihood of success.
So can you recall a story or two with regards to, again, thinking about stakeholders and their lack of knowledge and experience in building products, that you've had some pushback, frustration, challenges to you in regards to just the whole lean philosophy?
Absolutely. There is a strong tendency to build it and they will come, even among companies that really ought to know better, right? Very smart people and all that stuff, but they're just accustomed to, okay, customer requested a feature, or we envisioned a feature, let's go build it and put it out there, right, in the next version. It can be a struggle. And again, the conception that you test ideas out, if you test them at all, at the very early stages of your business, and then you stop doing it, is something that I run into all the time. We'll probably dive into this a little bit later, but I'm a mentor at our local accelerator here in Charleston, South Carolina. And every year we get a cohort of founders. They're not just guys with ideas. They've got a company going. They've got some sales, things like that. And last year I ran this course on Lean Startup, and saw some blank looks on people's faces when I was like, so now we're going to learn about how to build a prototype to test out your assumptions. And they're like, we already have a product. Why would we ever need to build a prototype? I've got a piece of software. It's up on the App Store. I've got customers using it. And my answer is, how do you know that it is really solving customers' problems, right? Have you reached your sales goals for it? How do you know that some very large percentage of people will actually pay money for your software that presumably takes their pain away and solves a really big problem for them? So that's kind of that built-in pushback you get that says, I've got it. I think I know my customers. I think I know this problem, and I'm like, well, you or me. Let's go talk to a customer, right? I almost guarantee you, and it's also how you talk to the customer. You got to make sure you're asking questions the right way. You don't want yes, no, that looks cool, looks great, thank you. You need to engage in meaningful conversation about the problems they have, and that at their
has
workplace.
To be so common. I mean, I've invested in the product build myself, and I am guilty, and I need to always be talked off the ledge as far as I know my customer. Let's just build it. As you say, they will come. Let's shorten the cycle. Let's get it out there. And I'm just injecting a certain amount of sort of wishful expectation and luck, thinking that if we could just, I can get a faster ROI if I just get these features out to the marketplace. And it's, I got to think that this is so common, and this conversation has to take place, whether or not it gets vocalized or not, because it's rattling in the back of people's minds, and they may have sort of behind the scenes criticism or doubt in regards to the product manager, because we could be going so much faster. We could be, generating revenue, sooner, but this guy's slowing it down and he's milking us for, fees or whatever. But whatever their rationale is, I can see where you need to be the logical professional in the room.
you have to kind of keep on it, and it's until it becomes muscle memory. You have to be on it. And a key question to ask is, what are the consequences of not getting this right? Right. Well, your business could fail. Nobody could buy your product. Right. That's pretty extreme. That assumes you've got some really core things wrong. You've really missed the mark. Probably more likely is you haven't gotten it quite right. Maybe you've missed some things. Maybe you're solving a tangential problem that is related to the big problem. Maybe you haven't discovered what the big problem is yet. You're attacking a smaller problem, but because you haven't talked to the customer, you don't know what their actually secret, really, really big problem that they'll pay a lot of money for. You could see less revenue than you ought to, right? Because you haven't solved the most valuable problem. So it's not just it's a best practice. There's real consequences to getting it wrong.
So how do you dig that out? How do you find out what their, the thing is, everyone's like, no, this is our umbrella problem, but how do we open an umbrella, right? There's a button. Well, if the button doesn't work, then what do you have to do? You have to force it up from the handle. So, when you talk to, these teams, how do you, I guess it would have to be quickly, discern what is the goal, right? Because there's lots of things in life that are like, oh, I just want to do this. But that's point Z. What about A through the rest of the alphabet to get there? They're like, I want to be here. And I had a friend of mine over the weekend. It's like, oh, I want to do an Ironman. I'm like, okay. So, I don't own a bike. Okay, that's a big problem, right? There's three things you have to do, and one thing you don't own the bike. So, finding out those types of things, between the A and the Z is very important. So when you go in and you start talking with these companies, how do you get to that? What's the minutia in the middle? So you're not trying to fly from point A to point Z and not even looking below on the way through.
It's a great question. It's so I go through some exercises that are basically challenge teams. What are your assumptions, right? You're building this software. Obviously, it's based upon a vision, but you are making some assumptions about how it should work, what problems to solve, all the way through user interface. And I actually work with non-software companies as a mentor too, and there's service businesses or hardware businesses, same problems, right? But what are those assumptions? Can we list them out? And sometimes that takes a little bit to say, they really are there. You must have them, right? So let's list them out. And then one by one, let's come up with ideas on, okay, assumption number one, how can we test that assumption? How can we prove it to be either true or false so that we know, right? So that we're not taking a big risk and making a big guess about what we're doing about our product. And that kind of gets them on the road to thinking about ways to test things out. And, it starts with, as soon as we have the feature, we're going to show it off and beta test it. Well, that's still kind of expensive and time consuming. Like, how could we do it simpler, cheaper? And here I'm thinking about whiteboards, a video, if you want to include some technology, slides, a piece of paper, a flow chart, storytelling. These are all very inexpensive and mostly non-technical ways and cheap ways to explain your idea or your concept and share it meaningfully with customers who they'll be able to get it, right? They don't need a fully functioning piece of software. Sometimes the software actually gets in the way because it's so new to them and there's buttons everywhere and stuff that, it's hard for them to grasp how to even use it. But everyone gets what a sketch on a piece of paper looks like or things like that. So, go simple, cheap. Fail very cheaply. If you get it wrong, crumple up a piece of paper, sketch it differently, right? Try again. You're spending almost no money doing it, and you're possibly saving your company, your product, or at the very least, time and cost, right?
Glenn, what is the right mix, blend, and scope of customer feedback throughout the entire, all the way from ideation to, launches of various iterations? What is the right amount, and what are the different, aspects of customer feedback, and do companies tend to want to shorten that loop because of the time involved, or the effort, or the cost involved?
Generally, it's an area of pushback. Lots of times it's looked at as a cost center, right? I have 20 customers. They report bugs, they complain, they want new things, stuff like that. We have to spend time supporting them, giving them new versions, things like that. Not adversarial, but it's generally not it's almost like they're on the other side, right? So there can be pushback in terms of the time spent and the investment in those conversations. And it's something I do have to kind of push through. And it doesn't have to take more time. You're probably already interacting with those customers around those other topics, around bugs or issues or complaints. Why not interact with them around something positive at the same time, which is, we have this vision of doing this thing and it should really benefit you. But before we even build it, we really want to engage with you and find out what you think. Customer will love you for thinking of them and inviting them to participate in your product roadmap. And you'll learn a lot. And like I said before, you have to approach it. There is a tendency to say, how does this look? Or, you have to invite them to a much more in-depth conversation about, how do you do this thing in the real world? And, sometimes that leads into journey mapping and some other techniques, but, it doesn't have to be terribly complicated, simple conversation, but you have to avoid the dreaded, looks great, thank you, dive in deeper.
How much diversity and what type of, how much customer feedback, for example, relying on one or two customers, or 3 or 4, or 20 or 30. I mean, how much is too much? How little is too little?
As usual, it depends. It's quality over quantity, right? I think depending upon your business and your customer segments, if you've got truly distinct customer segments that operate in different ways or have different needs, you owe it to yourself to sample each of those, at least like a representative 1 or 2 from each area. But it doesn't have to be a lot. I'd say 3 is certainly sufficient, right? You don't want to just rely upon 1 in case they're an outlier. But if you'll start to see some common themes, even as you just get to 3. And then the rest, again, you're probably interacting with them just as a customer anyway. So you can have some of those light conversations. But in terms of really engaging with a special couple, I'd say three's plenty. If you're involved in 10 different industries, maybe you need to pump that up a bit.
So you mentioned quality and speed and quantity. How do you balance that with your customer? I mean, and I guess that gets all the way back to how do you maintain alignment with these variables, and how do you get buy-in and complete confidence and trust in your stakeholders, in you balancing those variables?
Right. Especially for an existing customer, you do have to get in and and control, apply some control and best practices to how you're managing their tech debt, their quality issues, because typically they will have a big list of bugs that they haven't made too much of a dent into. So we have to avoid the chaos where these things are starting to impact how we run the development team on a daily basis. And, if it's pure chaos, hair on fire on everything, you got to address that if you're going to make any progress whatsoever. And part of that is about setting expectations with customers. I hear you. We have these problems. We've identified the ones that are really impacting your business, and those are at the top of the list. And here's a time frame when we're going to deliver solutions on them. Others, we hear you; they're on our backlog. We are going to chip away at them, and generally that works out great. The topic of quality is overall an interesting one. Where I usually get involved is quality is thought of as we have bugs in our product. Customers are unhappy. Maybe the product isn't working or a feature isn't working correctly. Over the years, and sometimes it's a hard lesson to learn, but quality has to be built in from the beginning. It's a bit of a cliche, but in reality, what we're just talking about, quality starts with, are you solving the right problem? And in a way that the customer will value and pay for it. That's a quality problem if you get it wrong. As if you do get it wrong, that's going to bug you for the whole rest of your company's life. Early. So at that point, requirements, designs, even before you start writing a shred of code, quality is baked in to the entire process. So that's a misconception that I run into all the time, is that quality is measured by how many issues we have in the backlog, how many complaints we have, things like that. And those are real things, but moving forward, we have to start baking quality in backwards from, customer reporting to internal testing to beta to developers reviewing each other's code to unit tests to all that. The earlier you can catch it, the less expensive it will be.
I have a couple of examples with you, but you bring a great resume and experience. But one thing I noticed about you, and I want you to comment on that, whether it's just your style or how important it is for any fractional CTO or product manager in sort of your shoes to build trust and credibility before you start dictating based on your experience and expertise. But you spend a lot of time. I remember one client. You spent a lot of time in just building strong relationships and having that stakeholder team to treat you as an equal, as part of their team, as a friend, as a confidant. They gave you their trust, as opposed to just coming in as a hired professional and earning it over time. Which I don't know if you ever really earn it. I mean, you may be doing the things, but do you really get the sort of the backing and the confidence that you would by doing some of the things that I've seen you do?
I think it's important, and from the get-go, I really don't come across as I'm your fabulous, expensive consultant that is going to tell you everything you're doing wrong and tell you how to fix it. I come in and it's always humbling. I have a lot to learn about your business, about your product, about your team. And I'm going to invest my time learning that, because it's going to form a real strong foundation for everything that we do later. And it is a strong component about that leads to earning trust. Trust also has to come with deliverables, right? You do have to be able to walk the walk and start delivering and showing that these best practices and these processes that you're putting in place are starting to pay off. And you have to be able to measure and track and report on things in a way that is meaningful. Saying, well, we got 16 tickets done this last sprint. Before I came on, we got 8. It's helpful, but try to couch it in a way that is much more meaningful to, say, like a CEO, right, who's looking at the bottom line. But yeah, I don't know how others work, but it's much more fun for me to be a partner, right? I get to play part of your entrepreneurial team, your leadership team, and I truly behave that way. I work on other projects at the same time, but when I'm with you, you've got me. I am your partner. We're going shoulder to shoulder. We're solving problems. We're talking real about issues, and the stronger the trust gets built, the deeper those conversations can go. And like, you truly are talking like friends. And I have earned friendships over the years.
That's great. Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about when you work with offshore teams, global teams. And in your role, I'm assuming often you are both the product manager and the product owner. What is how do you build the infrastructure and the reporting, the communication and reporting structure? What is your sort of go-to structure when building these teams? How do you bring on a team? How do you embed them and integrate them? How do you communicate? What is the reporting structure? Do you perceive yourself as a micromanager, or do you leave it at a certain level of handoff and accountability? What is your favorite approach to that?
Yeah. As things get started, generally I will be pretty hands-on, attend most of the daily scrums. Even if it's off hours, generally we will negotiate that out with an offshore team. A good offshore team is going to come with their own, call it an architecture person or a project manager or someone that basically the developers will look to for day-to-day progress. But I need to get in there and see from my own eyes that it's a machine that is running well. Over time, I can step back from that a bit and focus more on the other ceremonies that are in the planning stages, like planning out roadmap, sprints, prioritization, things like that. But making sure that team is cohesive, and I'm always a big fan of hiring a team and a firm that will stand behind the team versus going out to the various networks and handpicking individuals. It's just, especially with companies at the size that my clients are.
That happens a lot, though, doesn't it? I mean, it seems to me there's a prevalence of being able to go on a platform and to compile your own team of people in different places. And
I can go on the internet right now and do a Google search and come up with 8 billion developers who will be like, yeah, I'll create your product for you. My email inbox is always filled. My LinkedIn inbox is always filled with someone seeking. But I really, I always go back to basically software companies get one shot. And if you blow it, maybe you'll be able to recover, but probably not, right? If you're going to bring on a team to build your product and maintain your product, it's a momentous decision. And why would you risk it? Why would you not go with a team that has been vetted, has a track record, has references, shows really well, all those things?
Thank you, Glenn, for all those insights. We're really happy that you got to join us today. The conversation was packed with insights on guiding early companies and the importance of understanding the big picture. We learned so much from your experiences and your advice. To all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the limitless potential of software and transforming business.